Ladies and gentlemen, I hate to interrupt wonderful conversations because that's what Govmaker is about, but we're going to start in about a minute if you can take your seats.
No, it didn't. Oh, sorry.
Well, welcome back, everyone. I figured we'd need a ballroom for the people who wanted to come to this session. I'm Program Co-Chair of Govmaker 4, Lorna Brown, and I want to introduce the moderator of this morning's panel on using technology to build a better society, addressing social challenges through digital collaboration and citizen engagement. Natalie Frank will introduce her fellow panelists, one of whom has been added to the agenda after it was printed, so that's a bonus. Natalie will tell you about the format and how you can participate. She is a lab manager at ESDC and was a partner in the major project that we're talking about. This panel will be in English. Comme toujours, vous trouverez des écouteurs sur la table au fond de la salle. Natalie.
So, thank you, Lorna. Everyone hear me okay? Great. So, it's a pleasure to be here this morning in Fredericton. I'm Natalie Frank, as Lorna mentioned. I'm the manager of the ESDC Innovation Lab. I'm excited to be joined today by these two talented and inspiring ladies. As Lorna mentioned, we've been very fortunate to have a second person added late to the program. So Jessie Darling from the Brookfield Institute for Innovation plus Entrepreneurship is joined here with us, as well as Megan Hellstern from Code for Canada. There's information about both of them in the program for the conference, so I won't get into too much detail about their backgrounds, but I really would rather have us tell you more about ourselves as we go through telling you about our experiences with digital collaboration and engagement of citizens through technology. So you'll learn more about what we do in our organizations as we talk about our experiences. Je vais continuer la tendance à pratiquer un peu mon français aussi et juste vous dire en partant que, comme Lorna a dit, notre présentation sera surtout en anglais, mais n'hésitez pas si vous avez des questions. On va garder une certaine période pour des questions vers la fin, so we're going to be leaving a time for questions. We really want to be engaging in a conversation with you as well. Once we get to the question period, please don't hesitate to speak in the language of your choice. On a des traducteurs, and we'll make a good effort. I'll make a good effort. It's a good opportunity for me to practice my French as well. We don't have a ton of time, so why don't we just jump right into it? So, I was the person that convened these folks to organize the panel today, and I know it already has a really long title, but I'll tell you, when I first imagined this session, what I really wanted to subtitle it was, "Not Every Problem Needs a Hackathon." And I was finding that I was getting asked more and more to help colleagues figure out how to embark on different types of techniques, new ways for creatively engaging citizens in complex social issues, often with a technology angle. And it made me realize that we needed better ways to talk amongst ourselves and to educate ourselves about some of the things we were learning and trying. I was finding that sometimes we can get swept up in a desire to jump on a certain cool bandwagon, and hackathons were one of the things that we were hearing a lot about, just a lot of excitement. And it's a wonderful tool, and it can give you amazing things, but it's just one tool. And so what I'm hoping we're going to get from today is an opportunity to talk about the various ways that we can engage citizens through technology, about technology, and to give you a better sense from the concrete lessons that we have learned and what are the options before you and how to measure and how to balance what you might do with these different types of techniques. The other nice thing, and I'm picking up on something that Hillary mentioned earlier, because we work, all three of us, in innovation spaces, we kind of have the advantage of being those first movers as well, to be able to try some things that maybe others have not yet had the opportunity to try. And so it allows us to also share with you some of those early learnings, because I'll tell you, every one of us, we're going to be talking to you about some experiences concretely and things that we've done in the public sector, engaging citizens with technology. And every one of our experiences had wonderful elements of success, and they were not perfect. We learned a ton doing this. They're fairly new for all of us. I am not a techie person, and I embarked on this pretty much in the dark. And I know a lot of us, when we start doing this work, it feels very much like we're grappling in the dark. And it certainly was the case for me. And what I'm hoping in sharing these lessons is that for those who pick up the batons and press forward in applying these techniques, that you won't have to start from ground zero. You'll have the opportunity to benefit from these lessons, from the mistakes that we'll tell you we made, and from the things that we wish we would have done differently. So this is a slide to introduce us, but before I do that, I just want to get a quick sense of who's here in the room. So a quick little exercise will also get you on your feet. I'm going to ask just a series of questions. If the answer is yes, stand up. And if the answer is no, you can sit back down. So do you work for a government? Is it the federal government? Est-ce que c'est le gouvernement fédéral? Provincial government? Are you a student or a researcher? Êtes-vous un étudiant ou un chercheur? Awesome. Welcome. Do you know what a hackathon is? Est-ce que vous connaissez ce que c'est, un hackathon? Not bad. Have you ever organized one? Great. We've got some experienced folks in the room. And if your boss came to you tomorrow and said, I want us to hack our program and you're in charge, would you be terrified? Would you be excited? Would you feel lost? Okay. Well, I think this session is going to be perfect for this room. We've got some experience in the room. We've got a lot of people, I think, who are eager to learn. So let's get on with it. A bit about us really quickly. And I'll also just say fast that this presentation itself was an example of digital collaboration. The three of us have been working in Google Docs to coordinate one presentation, so not 3 decks, one deck, one slide deck amongst the three of us. It's been a great little experience for us. And I'm going to pass it over to Megan to tell you a bit about herself and Code for Canada.
Thanks, Natalie. Hello, everyone. My name is Megan Halstern. I'm the Education and Community Program Manager with Code for Canada. I'm really pleased to be here. I'm going to tell you a little bit about our organization, if I can get this thing working. Nope. How did you get it to work? Oh, it's up there. Perfect. Clearly, I need more coffee this morning. So Code for Canada, we're a new national nonprofit. Put your hand up if you've heard of us before. Oh, yay, wow, that's amazing. So I'll really not spend too much time talking about who we are. We're a relatively new nonprofit. We started in spring this year, and we really are focusing on bringing together folks inside and outside government who want to use technology to create more public good. And we do this through a couple different programs. One of which is our fellowship program. We basically match folks from outside in the private sector, generally technologists, designers, developers, product managers, with really exciting projects inside government that require their skills. So we're really happy. Our first cohort of fellows actually just landed in their government hosts last week. And so we have a team working in Ottawa with the federal government and another team in Toronto with the Ontario government. So the fellowship program is based on a series of programs that are similar to it around the world, and I'll talk a little bit more about fellowships later because they are one of the models that we find really exciting in terms of resident engagement. We also do a lot of work around our community network. So we're really privileged here in Canada to have a growing civic tech ecosystem. And so again, I'll talk a little bit more about that, but my work there is really trying to support the growth of these communities and strengthen the overall ecosystem, whether that be through funding or resources or advocacy. Lastly, we do a lot of education and training. So I actually just wrapped up teaching a course at Ryerson University on digital government and civic tech. We do a lot of professional training for governments as well as capacity building in communities. So through those programs, we've been really lucky to work on a lot of amazing projects, and we'll get a little bit more into those afterwards. But I'm going to turn it over to Natalie again to talk a little bit about what the Innovation Lab does.
Thanks, Megan. So, as I said, we'll go really fast through our organizations, but Megan asked you if you know about Code for Canada. Who's heard of the ESDC Innovation Lab? A few people? Great, you're more popular than I am. Basically, we're an organization within the federal government, within the Department of Employment and Social Development. We were created in the spring of 2015. We're a fairly small team, but it's been growing nicely for the last 2 years. Our basic focus is to connect the. Sorry, I'm just gonna. Sorry. So we're a human-centered design lab. And that means that we practice hands-on. We don't just talk about. We practice hands-on iterative design and testing that's built with and from the people that we serve. And the mandate that we were given when we got created a little over 2 years ago was basically to connect the dots between policy and program and service delivery. There was a sense, especially in a large organization like ESDC, where we have Service Canada, of course. Service is such an integral part of what we do in our organization, and there was just a great sense that we weren't sufficiently taking full advantage of our expertise as an organization in service, all those touch points that we have with Canadians, and being able to both use those opportunities to improve how we design and deliver our programs and policies and services directly, and also to be able to leverage that asset that we have in our relationship with Canadians. So the basic thing to know about our lab, we do 3 types of work. We do what we call full design project work, which means that we work many months with a specific targeted big problem. We work with colleagues all the time, so we don't do work just inside our own little team. Everything we do is in collaboration with colleagues inside our department. And those design projects are tackling a very particular kind of a problem. Right now, we're looking at low-income families, for instance, and how they plan for and save for their children's education. We do a variety of focus projects. So those are things where people come to us with specific challenges, but in a much more focused way in the moment to help them work through issues. We apply our design methodologies to help them work through a moment of a challenge. And we do capacity building, so a lot of work inside the department, lunchtime events, we bring in speakers. We have method cards too. I was excited to hear about Hillary's method cards. So we share techniques and tools and resources, and at the end you'll see we'll be supplying you with information about some of the resource locations for where you can find more information about the lab and what we offer. And over to Jessie.
This guy? Yeah. Great. So my name is Jessie. A quick show of hands, who's heard of the Brookfield Institute for Innovation and Entrepreneurship? Okay, great. That's more than I thought, so that's great. So I work at the Brookfield Institute for Innovation and Entrepreneurship, but specifically on the Policy Innovation Platform. And we support the continuous adoption of policy innovation methods and tools by policymakers and government in order to deliver better policies, programs, and services for all Canadians. So we do this by 3 ways. The first is by designing and running engagements that apply policy innovation methods and tools. The second is by curating resources with policymakers to better deepen the knowledge about how these tools could be applied. And then the third thing we do is we evaluate how we ran those engagements, did we achieve success, and then we learn out loud and share our findings. So I'm going to quickly talk about our process or approach because the example I'll give later really, I think, shows this in a tangible way. But the first thing we do is we work with partners to scope and frame their problem statement. So really understanding the problem that you're trying to solve. I'm sure many people in this room understand that this takes time. So we do this sometimes directly with the partner. Sometimes we host stakeholder workshops. But really spending up time, I think Hillary talked about this in her presentation, the discovery phase. This is a really important part of our process. So with a better understanding of the actual problem, we have a more nuanced understanding of the appropriate tool or methodology we should apply to solve that problem. The third thing is we then design a process that applies that tool or methodology, and then we convene and engage citizens and stakeholders to tackle that problem. And then finally, we evaluate what worked and what didn't and share our lessons out loud.
Cool. So now that you know a little bit about us and why perhaps we are well suited to speak about some of the models that we've been applying in our work, we're going to talk about some of the exciting sort of ways that you can actually work with both technology as well as residents to further your mission. So a lot of the models we're talking about in particular really look at public bodies, whether they be government, nonprofits, anyone with a social good mission. How can you work with residents and other folks who are eager to share their passion, talent, and skills with you? So there's a couple different models that we found and we want to share with you. And of course, if there are others that you've encountered, we'd love to hear about them as well. As Natalie mentioned, one of the beauty of the sort of organizations that we work in is that we are meant to be those sandbox spaces where we can test these things out in a slightly lower risk way and really help be sort of your partner in innovation. So some of the models that we've seen, and we're going to go through each of these in detail, are fellowships, micro procurements, which I was really happy to see Hillary actually mention. Procurement seems to be this kind of challenge, massive challenge for a lot of organizations. Civic technology and hack nights, which I also mentioned, design challenges and design jams, as well as hackathons and code fests. And there's a reason why hackathon is last on the list. As Natalie said, not every problem needs a hackathon. I'll also draw your attention, we'll come back to this later, but there is a sort of worksheet or handout on a couple of the tables. If there isn't one on your table, don't worry. You may want to take a look at it. We'll tell you a bit more about it later, but it definitely mentions some of these tools, and it's actually a sort of process that several of us worked on to develop in terms of figuring out how do you match the need to the correct model for collaboration. So I'll start off by talking about fellowships. I mentioned that we have 2 teams here in Canada now under Code for Canada working with the federal and Ontario governments. Fellowships really are a time-limited, team-based, although sometimes they are individual, sort of placement where you might take someone from outside of an organization and actually bring them in generally to work on a specific project or area of research. They're really best for capacity building and project delivery, and I really find that I think the fellowship is best when you really need that outside perspective. So the Code for Canada Fellowship, for example, is really built around this idea that accessing digital talent right now, for a number of reasons, is really difficult for government. And so Code for Canada is really happy to be sort of a broker to help you access that talent and also give those folks from outside government the support that they need. I worked for the federal government for several years in Ottawa, and I felt really honored to be able to design the onboarding training for our fellows. It was basically the month of training I wish I had had before I went into government, because it's not the same as other environments, and you really do need different skills and knowledge sets to really thrive there. So it felt really great. They just finished their month of training. So I'll draw your attention to a really great case study of what fellowships can produce. This example comes out of the United States, where Code for America, which is sort of our grandmother organization, if you want to call it that. They started in 2008. They've had several cohorts of fellows go through their program. They worked with the government of California to redesign food assistance, basically food stamp access. The historical process took people over an hour if you had all of your paperwork in order. If you didn't, it could be even multiple days. And generally when people are applying for food stamp assistance, it's because they really need it urgently. And so any delay is potentially, keeping healthy food away from children. Like, this is real life, sort of impact. So a team of fellows worked with the government of California, and in 1 month, which in government time is nothing, they were able to prototype a modern user-centered system. Within 18 months, they were able to scale that system to 6 counties. Right now, I think it's been around for about 2 years. They're in 19 counties, and they just recently announced that they're going to be scaling that across the state. So, thinking about what Hillary mentioned, this idea of starting small, iterating, learning, this is what these fellows have done, and it's having a real impact. The uptake of this program has increased dramatically, much like Hillary showed with OSAP. And so, this is just a small team coming in with a really dedicated, focused mandate, some support from the organization, and the opportunity to really, show what all the best of modern digital practices can do when applied to public service environments. So micro-procurement is another interesting model that I'm really excited to start seeing emerge in Canada. Anyone here who has been involved in procurements knows they can be painful even at the best of times. So micro-procurements are essentially a small-scale, rapid access to talent and services. They are usually facilitated by an online digital platform, and I'll show you a couple examples of those. There's a bunch of different ways that they can overcome some of the challenges with traditional procurement. I would say they're most useful when you have a very clear sense of what you need or what outcome you're looking for and a short timeline. And of course, the budget to support the procurement of it. So in British Columbia, since 2015, they've actually had the BC Dev Exchange. This is basically a self-service technology micro-purchasing platform. It basically enables small providers to bid on small contracts very quickly. It also lets the government of British Columbia and more than a dozen other organizations access these talents across the province and even the country. And so they've hosted dozens of projects on here. I'll show you quickly what it looks like because it's a bit hard to maybe conceptualize. So this is actually what the sort of procurement sort of platform looks like. You can see there's a couple small opportunities there. They tend to be in the sort of $5,000 to $25,000 range, and they're very clear in terms of what outcome they're looking for, as well as what's required of the contractor. So to me, this is really exciting. As someone who left government and then tried to work through traditional procurement processes as a provider, on both sides, that experience is not great. Whether you're someone in government trying to purchase something or someone outside government trying to offer services or products, like there's a real challenge. And so to me, this type of simple, easy to use platform is really, really exciting. It's so exciting that the Government of Canada now has a beta version of it as well. And I also want to flag that this is a great example of openness in practice. So the British Columbia government made their underlying software under the BC Dev Exchange open source. And so the Government of Canada actually took that code and is building on top of it. And so to me, there's a really wonderful example of that sort of cross-jurisdictional collaboration and sort of taking a model that's proven to work and scaling it. So it's still in beta. I don't believe they've purchased anything through it yet. But this is one to keep an eye on for sure. And, governments control a lot of resources. And so if they're able to share those with more people and really access those talents and skills, to me, that's extremely, extremely exciting. So the next model I want to flag for you is Civic Tech and Hack Nights. So Civic Tech is a growing movement. It's actually a global movement, which I'll show you shortly. But it's basically groups of people who come together regularly to build public good technology, often at Hack Nights. So Hack Nights are just basically a name for a regular gathering of people. Usually they happen at night, but they could easily be hack days. And actually there's one here in Fredericton tomorrow night that I'm going to be at, and I hope if you're interested, I'd encourage you to come check it out. They tend to be open, volunteer-led, and they really are just sort of people who have either passion or talent or skills or some combination, and they want to put them to work. To me, it's extremely humbling. I helped co-found Toronto's civic tech community 2 years ago. Since then, we've hosted 100 hack nights, all with basically volunteer time and some sponsors that give us space and food. And we've seen dozens of projects and more than 2,000 individuals come to at least one of our events. And so to me, I'm really excited to be helping build out this resource. Why does that matter to government? These are your allies. These are people in communities who want to work on meaningful projects. They want to help you do sort of the things that your organization is trying to work on. So to me, the fact that people are starting to gather and organize is extremely, extremely exciting. So as I mentioned, this is a global movement. Code for America oversees what they call the Brigade program. So there are actually hundreds of these communities around the world. They vary in size and maturity. They vary in size in terms of community, geography, all of that kind of thing. But to me, it's incredibly amazing to see people getting involved in their local communities, whether they're part of the formal public service or not. I often call civic tech as sort of the public service outside of the public service, because these folks are building public good using technology. Here in Canada, we're really happy that we have at least 7 communities that we are aware of at Code for Canada. There may be more. Again, these range in maturity, but as you can see, they're actually across the country, which is amazing. We have Civic Tech Vancouver, Edmonton, London, Waterloo, Toronto, Ottawa, and Fredericton. And I feel like every week I get emails from folks looking for resources. We offer a couple guides and things like that to start up their own. So I've talked to people in Regina, Mississauga, Charlottetown. I'm even talking to some people in Northwest Territories. So this is a really exciting model. And if you have a community in your sort of region, I encourage you to go and check it out. And if you don't, I'd encourage you to think about how you could help seed something like that, because they are a very, very potent resource. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Jessie, who's going to share a little bit about another exciting model.
Great. So I'm going to talk to you guys about design challenges and jams, and this is a model that has been tried out in the US and in the UK in particularly. Nesta has an entire team dedicated to challenges of different lengths and times and have achieved quite remarkable success. In the Canadian context, grand challenges on the federal level is a really great example. And I'm going to speak to a project I've been working on with the Ontario government. So increasingly we're seeing these as a really great way. Some of its benefits include it's a time-limited collaborative project that is really focused on a particular issue. It enables access to creative and new ways of problem solving, and it's a great way to identify new possibilities and bring together a community. And I think it's really important to note that a community is within government, outside of government, but it's also the intersection of civic tech communities working alongside with public servants, which is a really exciting thing to see. Oh, just kidding.
Well, here, stay up here. I'm going to briefly talk about one challenge that we worked on, but it's actually led directly into some work that Jessie is doing at Brookfield, so I'll let her talk a bit more about that. In the meantime, so we were really lucky actually to work, and this is how I started encountering Natalie. We worked with the Employment and Social Development Canada Innovation Lab last year to do a design challenge focused on one of those classic, entrenched, really difficult challenges that government is dealing with, youth employment. So we essentially did a very short turnaround, very small budget test of this model. So in 6 weeks and with just $5,000, we put out a challenge to Toronto civic tech community, and we said, hey, we want to see your best ideas for addressing youth employment. But we don't just want your ideas. We want you to ground it in a user-centered design process. So we want you to go out, do user research, talk to actual young people. We want you to come up with some ideas, prototype them, and test them. So it seems like a tall order. We were, it was like, well, I don't know if it's enough time or enough money. We were really happy that 6 groups actually went through this process. They documented all of their learnings. The report for this project is excellent. I encourage you to check it out. It contains all of the user research and the prototypes. So not only did ESDC get great prototypes from the community. 90% of the people who participated in this were young people themselves. And for almost all of them, it was their first time ever interacting with government. And I remember hearing stories about just, how amazing it was that government actually cares what we think. To me, that type of transformation is really exciting, and it's hard to quantify, but I think it's the type of thing that these models are really powerful for. So the prototypes were really extremely high quality, and I'll show you a couple of them in a second. But I just want to draw your attention to how ESCC not only got these prototypes, but that resource, those user research reports, those prototypes are also put out into the public. And so they have contributed to public understanding of this complex issue, which to me is something that governments really have a huge opportunity to continue doing, because we can't solve something like youth employment alone. No one sector or organization can do that. It's going to take all of us working together. So here are a couple of the prototypes. I'll just draw your attention closely to them. So the one on the left is called Voucher. And so this emerged in response to the need for folks who have not yet had formal employment often find it very difficult getting references. And so people won't hire them unless they have a reference. And so this is basically a platform where people who have worked with those young people, whether they be coaches or church leaders or community group leaders, can actually vouch for them and say, actually, Susie is really very reliable and she's very keen and confident in that kind of thing. The one on the right is called Employ Me. This emerged in response to the fact that many young people don't like to use the phone, and they don't like to go into government service centers because they're often quite uncomfortable and that kind of thing. What young people are already using is Facebook. And so this is essentially a Facebook chatbot that would connect young people with resources for finding employment. It would also provide a kind of friendly, gentle sort of accountability and support mechanism, right? So it could kind of check up on you and say, hey, did you apply for that job that you were interested in? Do you need any help? That kind of thing, all in sort of a really accessible, friendly way. So this was an amazing project, but I'm more excited about the fact that it inspired a different jurisdiction to work with Brookfield on a challenge that's actually happening right now. So I'll turn it back over to Jessie to talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, so that's a great introduction, and I think it's like she said, it's wonderful to see that I think you kind of undersold yourself. It was a 6-week challenge that the impact I think is longer lasting in the sense that students and civic tech community got to run through a different process and ultimately inspired the project that I'm now excited to tell you guys about. So. Throughout this summer, 2017, we worked with the Ministry of Advanced Education and Skills Development at the Ontario government to better understand a problem they were trying to solve. So they were trying to wrap their heads around the fact that they had tons of labor market information, but it wasn't really being used, or wasn't being used to its full potential. And so what was the problem they were particularly focused on is that high school students were struggling to find the information they needed to navigate and choose their post-secondary education career options. So ultimately, there was this deep desire to unlock the latent potential of these data sources and improve the user experience of people trying to get access to this information. So this really led to the development of the design and development of the Student Pathways Challenge. So what is it? In October of this year, 2017, we launched the Student Pathways Challenge, which is a 6-week challenge in response to many of the issues that MAISD identified. First, that labor market information is rarely, if ever, used when high school students makes decisions about what they should do post-graduation. Second, that students have a number of influencers and factors that go into the decision about where they should go to post-secondary education. And third, that students want a digital tool that can help demystify their future. Whether or not this is a good thing, this generation is reliant on Netflix and Facebook and social media to curate their life. And so what could a digital tool look like that could help provide them with more information and nuanced understanding of what their future could look like? So with these 3 considerations in mind, we developed a problem statement. How might we help high school students gain a better understanding of available career opportunities and the education pathways to get them there by means of a digital tool? And we called on people with diverse backgrounds and perspectives to participate in this challenge. So I could spend a whole hour talking about the design considerations that go into a project like this. Everything from the length of time you give participants to develop their ideas, to the design and the architecture of the digital platform, to the pricing structure, as well as the rules and regulations. All of these elements require really careful thought and consideration, but most importantly, they should be integrated. That integration piece is really key to getting this right. But the piece I want to focus on today, because it often gets overlooked and under-resourced during the realities of project scoping and execution, is providing participants with ongoing supports and resources throughout the duration of a challenge. And so I just want to highlight some of the tools and resources that we provided participants with. And I guess what's great about this project is live, so you can go on and kind of see, maybe not now, but after this conference or this talk, what exactly I mean by the elements I'm about to speak through. So the first resource we provided was a user research toolkit. We recognize that many participants wouldn't have access to users, high school students. We wanted to develop a user research toolkit. We did this by conducting primary research in the form of focus groups and synthesizing secondary research so all participants could better understand key insights from high school students. So what were the barriers they were facing? What did they want out of a digital tool? What are the pain points along the high school trajectory where they really don't understand the decision points and how that might influence where they end up? So we have a synthesized toolkit that can be downloaded and is available to all participants as well as the public to check out. The second resource that I'm really proud of is that our counterparts at MAISD did an incredible job of cleaning up and preparing about 40 data sets. These included everything from the student experience at colleges and universities to graduation rates, essential skills needed for new occupations, as well as occupations that are at risk of automation. We know that jobs today, some of them are more at risk of being automated, so we want to make sure that when students choose a career path, they're going down a path that will exist in 3 to 5, 10 years. And what was really exciting to see is that many of these data sets were new. And so MAISD opened them up, and they will remain open post this challenge. Another resource we put together was a really robust reading list for people to get a deeper dive and understanding of the problem statement. This is basically a 6-page annotated bibliography that directs participants to additional resources and existing research that's already been done on this topic. The last two tools I want to highlight is, the first one is Slack. And I'm not sure how familiar people are in this room about Slack, but Slack is essentially a chat room. It's a software tool that can be used on your mobile device or a computer that if you're working on a specific project, you can collaborate on in real time with people, whether they be in this room or elsewhere. And it's just a great tool for organizing projects. So we created one for this project so that people could collaborate, share information, connect, build teams in real time. The other thing that was amazing about Slack, or has been amazing about Slack, is that it's a way for people to ask MAISD questions directly. A lot of the most amazing thing has been around the data sets. So as people go in and start poking around the data sets, they're able to ask in real time, hey, I don't quite understand this. What does this field mean? I'm having a hard time interpreting. And MAISD is responding in real time, and throughout the duration of the challenge has actually cleaned up the project, or the data sets, and developed more informational tools that we've forwarded on to participants in other ways. So it's been an amazing experience to see how in real time, even the resources that we provided and we thought were good have been enhanced through a tool like Slack. The other thing we did on Slack was actually hold office hours with high school students. So again, recognizing that people didn't have access to high school students, and we wanted to provide a safe environment to do that. We reached out through our networks to high school students or recent graduates, and basically people were able to ask them questions in real time. How did you make your decisions? Where are you now? What types of jobs are you getting? And so this has been a really great community that we've helped foster. And the last thing I'll say is that a digital tool is never enough. So what we wanted to do was be intentional about the community groups we reached out to and asked to provide an opportunity to connect with participants in real life. So we were fortunate enough to partner with a couple civic tech groups across the province, Toronto, Kitchener-Waterloo, Ottawa, in London, Ontario, where they hosted us on their Tuesday night weekly hack nights. A representative from our core team went and explained the resources, explained the challenge goals and intentions, and then we also participated in DevFest in Sudbury. And so I think this is important, again, touching off some of the comments Hillary mentioned in the panel, is that making sure that you're reaching people at the margins. And so if a digital tool is only available for a certain population, how do we make sure that other people are included in this conversation that want to be? Oh yeah, okay, so hackathons. As my panelists have mentioned, this is another tool that is probably, I would say, the most frequent one that's been used thus far. It has a mixed reputation. And the reason for that is because they're short and they're very intensive focused. But they're collaborative events usually focused on building a technological solution. Ultimately, it accelerates progress on an issue and can potentially lead to a novel solution. I would say the positive thing I'll say about hackathons is that in my experience, partners who we've worked with on producing these, it's often a gateway drug into something better. They see the potential of taking a new approach. They see the positive influence it's had on professional development in their teams, and they come back saying, okay, what else can we do? And I think that is the most exciting thing for me, at least, what I see what hackathons can do, and the potential they create to something else.
Thanks, Jessie. So I'll tell you about one hackathon that we've been involved in that I think is a really great example of how to do this well. There are many others, Dementia Hack, Hacking Health. They're hosted by a range of organizations. It's not just a government thing. Ours is a civic hackathon in particular, so we really do focus on civic issues. So Code Across is actually a global event. So this happens to coincide with International Open Data Day. That's usually the first Saturday in March. This year, I believe it's March 3rd. And we've actually hosted 2 Code Across Toronto hackathons in the last 2 years. They've been extremely well received. To me, it's the ultimate, like, I am so humbled when I walk in on a Saturday in like the middle of February or March, and there are 100 people there at 8 a.m. who are ready to roll up their sleeves and put their skills to work on some really complex challenges. And so over the course of Code Across, we've ended up having more than 200 participants from all walks of life. So we really create an environment that is welcoming to not only technical folks, but folks who are from the policy profession, folks with lived experience, that kind of thing. And over the course of those, basically 8 hours, people work on these projects that we scope down. So we actually solicit a range of projects from public good bodies, generally government, some nonprofits, and we scope them down to something manageable for folks to work on. The beauty of a hackathon like this that's hosted in collaboration with the civic tech community is that those projects can continue at the hack nights that happen every week. So there's a really nice sort of on-ramp. A great example is actually from the Ministry of Advanced Education and Skills Development. One year they brought forward a challenge to do some data visualization. In the course of the day, the participants that worked on their challenge actually addressed it. They've created a platform that Maisie needed. And in the sort of post-event wrap-up, we actually realized that for them to have procured that solution would have taken multiple months and cost multiple thousands of dollars. And here they worked with the community to actually develop that. So, you know, as much as hackathons can get a bad rap, I do think, to Jessie's point, they are a really great taster. They are relatively easy to organize. We're actually gearing up for the 3rd Code Across, which will be in March. And I'll draw your attention, I will post this link on Twitter, and if you're interested, let me know. We're actually hosting a free workshop on December 12th in collaboration with the Policy Innovation Hub and the Government of Ontario about how to scope down challenges for hackathons and similar co-design challenges. So whether you're interested in something like Code Across or just generally, how do I take the big complex work that I'm doing and make it something manageable for outsiders to work on, we're going to go through some of what we've been learning over the last 2 years and share that. So it will be happening in Toronto, but we're going to live stream it, and we're also going to be offering an online recording afterwards. So I'd encourage you, if you're at all interested, to check that out. So here are some of the, here are some of the examples of the type of challenges we've worked on at Code Across. So we've done traffic data visualizations for the City of Toronto. We've done things around landlord and tenant relationships, very complex. We've done things about youth well-being. You know, there's a lot of data, there's a lot of tech, but it really is about bringing together all parts of the system that are involved in these issues and really trying to figure out how we can sort of bring out all the ingenuity that exists inside of a society. So that's a sort of quick and scrappy hackathon. I think now Natalie's going to tell you about a bit more of a robust one that she worked on, and then we'll move into some questions, and I'd love to hear if you have experience with any of these models or other models. So, Natalie.
Cool. Thanks, Megan. So I'm going to go through this really fast. One of the key things to know about this hackathon that I just want to tell you very, very briefly about, it was a hackathon that we ran at ESDC last year. When I say we, I mean the royal we of ESDC, not me. Our lab wasn't directly involved, but I've heard the stories, and we're fortunate at the Innovation Lab. We get to hear about lots of innovation happening in our organization. This is one really cool story. So it happened last fall, actually pretty much exactly a year ago. And it was one of those things that a huge amount of interest from the minister right on down. It wasn't a small thing to organize, and the most important thing I wanted to bring to this conversation was the lessons we learned doing it, so I'm channeling lessons from my colleagues. There's a video about the hackathon that will tell you sort of all the warm and fuzzy things about it, and I wanted to tell you a little bit about the background. The key elements of success of this event, I will say, and by all accounts, there was tremendous success around it. Partnership, community, and there was a third one. Data. Data was a big piece of this. So partnership in the sense that we didn't try to do this all by ourselves. We engaged some knowledgeable people on the ground who were helping to deliver it. Community in the sense that the community was involved in helping to articulate what the actual challenges were. Oh, and that's the third element of success, actually. Being really able to precisely describe some particular problems. And that's the thing that you really need to keep in mind if you want to embark on a hackathon or this type of a strategy. You need to be able to, picking up on Megan's point, you really need to be able to distill down your problem if you're dealing with social issues, and we presented this as, you know, how do you hack and how do you use technology on complex social issues. You really need to be able to distill the problems down into little bite-sized chunks that are appropriate to hack, which means that it's probably not the best strategy, and you'll see in this case, the hackathon we did wasn't asking people, you know, how do we eradicate homelessness? The hackathon was asking about things like, how do we support people that work in shelters to be able to provide more clear services to those when they're looking for shelter beds. So really precise things. The organizations that were struggling with understanding their data sets around furniture provision for people in need. So these were some of the examples of problems that were hacked. There were actually 9 crisp problem statements that were articulated. The material is still on DataFest Ottawa, if anyone wants to go see. They were a key partner in delivering this for us, and or with us, I should say. There were some cool solutions developed, but I really want to jump to, and I've talked to you about the factors of success, I really want to jump to takeaways and what it is that we've been learning doing these exercises and being able to open up to the floor, because those of you who've had experience, and I know there are some of you in the room, we know that this isn't all rosy. There's great success that we're seeing, but we're still young and learning at this. So a few things that I wanted to say. In terms of my takeaways, being a newbie to this and exploring, we did this Civic Tech Code for Canada partnership on youth employment. I've heard my lessons from my colleagues about the homelessness hackathon. We like to, I think there's a certain mythology about these types of tools that they're going to be quick. And I think we need to unpack the quick, right? So there's an element of this that is exciting because it's quick. But the quick part of it is, and keep this in mind, the quick part is the part that gets you faster to some prototypes, some ideas, some solutions. but it won't actually, I don't think, if you're embarking on these types of strategies to kind of get shortcuts to solving big social problems, I think that's where we run into failed expectations, right? Or unmet expectations. And so we see this repeatedly, that that we don't think ahead when we embark on these techniques of all of the wraparound that needs to go into it, so that these really cool quick things, and you will get quick things. We got these amazing prototypes in 6 weeks that none of my colleagues could have ever put together that fast. But the wraparound that needed to go into how much information, how much data people needed to get to the right and useful and feasible and operationalizable ideas going in, and then all the work that happens on the back end to find ways to transfer what you've learned in that hack moment or in those few weeks or days of hacking back into our systems. That takes time, it takes commitment, it takes resources, it takes champions. It takes people knowing when you embark on it that there's going to be solutions that get developed that someone's going to need to own and champion and help shepherd through the system. So these types of things, they create an amazing amount of engagement, and one of the reasons why we do this is because of it allows us to bring in the expertise and talent and interests of citizens, and technology is allowing us to do that in ways now that I've never seen in my career in government quite this way, and so it's very exciting. But one of the things that we've really learned is that it's not a quick fix. So that was one of my key messages. And the other message has to do with the data elements, the plumbing around this. All of us, we've seen, and my colleagues have mentioned, the amount of work of public servants that went into cleaning and providing data sets. It's the unsexy behind the scenes part of these types of initiatives, and it's really important. So we get these sexy prototypes of innovation because we've done a homework in the back end of cleaning up data and making information available and providing papers and resources to participants so that they understand what are the problems we're trying to solve in a meaningful way. If they don't understand them, and this is the other big lesson that we learned when we did the youth employment exercise, we hadn't thought enough. We hadn't taken enough time to think about some of the things around data security, for instance, that would inevitably have to get layered in once we wanted to try some of these things and operationalize them. When we provide services on youth employment, privacy issues, security issues are really important for us as governments. And so we need to talk to participants about what that means if we want them, if we want to have them help us solve these problems. I think I'm going to stop there on the takeaways. So do you guys want to share any of your takeaways? Because I really want to get some.
Yeah, I think we want to get some questions.
Yeah.
But the one thing I guess I'll draw your attention to, and I think, Natalie, you summed it up really well, and this slide contains a little bit of that. The worksheet or template that I handed out, and feel free to grab a copy. This is a very draft prototype. We practice what we preach, and we put this together, a couple of us, basically to help match the need that you have to the correct model. And all that's to say, I think Natalie's point about not every problem needs a hackathon is utterly true. And if you walk away with nothing else, please try to remember that. There is a wide range of different ways that you can involve residents in your work, and we've only shown you a few. There's many others that we haven't even talked about here. And so, I mean, at least I won't speak for my panelists. I'm happy to chat through what those models are and what might make the most sense for you anytime. Please feel free to reach out. My contact info is on the last slide. But this sort of draft map is also meant to be a shorthand to help you kind of think about what is it that I'm actually trying to do and what are the models that make the most sense for that. And the map was really trying to go even beyond that and say who are the other people that you could connect with or talk to about those sort of models. So I'd encourage you to check it out. It's very draft. It's kind of out of date, so we'd love your feedback on whether this is something we should continue building out and update and maybe make interactive or that kind of thing. So there's copies on the front tables. We didn't put them all the way back. So I think we have 5 minutes left.
5 minutes
so
left.
yeah.
But we'd really love to hear, is this on? Oh, good. We'd really love to hear if folks have questions in the room. If you tried some of this and you've run into some challenges that you want to share. My main goal for today was to be able to share some of the concrete lessons and experiences so that you wouldn't feel like you have to start from zero. The other key message is that this is totally doable stuff. We can do this. It's not rocket science. We have partners out there to help us. But just curious questions or comments, things that you've tried.
Yeah, Julie.
It's a fun box. I was looking at it before, going, different. Okay, absolutely. So I got to try a hackathon back in October for the first time. I did the Hacking the Future of Work. And we did use Brookfield data, and it was an amazing experience. I think it's anyone who wants to consider a hackathon has to live through a hackathon, mostly because it's a humbling experience because, one, we have to get away from the notion that these young people don't have experience and they don't understand, and it's not necessarily true, the amazing things that come out of these things. Also, I have a crush now on all data scientists. And because they're amazing what they can do with data sets. But I suppose one of the things I'm kind of curious is, how do you decide, I know it's part of the homework phase, on who you want to invite to the table? I mean, what I do for a living is more along the lines of content design because I'm a language specialist, and oftentimes I see digital solutions that don't say anything or have the language that won't work for its key audience. So how do you make the decision of who to invite to the table?
That's a great question. My colleagues may have other things to say on it. My sort of top of mind reaction is that the more the better, right? So, and the beauty of a hackathon and an event like that is it's part of why you do it and what is the advantage of doing a hackathon is that it becomes a flashpoint opportunity to mobilize. And so if you have that opportunity and you're embarking on something, my recommendation would be think as broadly as you can about every aspect of stakeholders and partnership of the people that are engaged on that question. You have to have some idea going in, and if you're hacking something, you do need to be able to articulate what's the problem or series of problems. As soon as you've been able to articulate that, the more you can reach out to as many people who touch that problem as you can. Take that hackathon moment as also an opportunity to get all of those folks in a room together talking to each other, because even if they don't yield the ideal solution at the end of the day or weekend or what have you, they told us in our experience that one of the best things that happened about that hackathon was that they got to all talk to each other together in ways that they don't usually get the opportunity to do, and that's huge.
The only thing I'll add, so one of the things I love about these models is that there is no the table anymore. This is about creating more tables where people can opt in. And so to me, the idea of just having a singular table is somewhat outdated now. And I think it's about creating lots of different tables that have spaces for all different parts of a sector to address an issue. So, but good question. It is a challenge, especially when it comes to potentially resourcing and scaling up solutions that come out of a co-design process.
The only thing I'd add to that is that there's...
I'm afraid to toss it.
I think it goes back to, like, what does success look like? And there's a different model to be taken if you're doing, like, broad engagement versus if you're looking for a specific skill set. And so if you're looking for a specific skill set or outcome, you might want to engage a really interesting table or like a table of data scientists coupled with policy analysts or something. That might look different than if you're looking to do broad engagement about a particular topic. So I do take the point, like our mentality is go broad first, and then once you better understand what success looks like, you might need to refine that model a bit.
Hi, this is awesome to hear all of your lessons learned and all the work that you're doing. My name's Amanda. I'm with New Lab, a social innovation lab here in New Brunswick. We don't have data scientists, but we dream about having data scientists. And so I'm wondering, where do you find them and what are the qualities that you would look for? And I guess that's coming from and if anybody's from our academic institutions in the room, this is no offense, but we're looking for a different, yeah, you tell us what we're looking for.
Okay, where to find them? That's a good question. I'm fortunate to be embedded within Ryerson, so I hear your point about, there's a different type of data scientist you're probably looking for. I have access to, I think this might go to your second point, where I'm looking for data scientists who can understand data but also communicate it in a way that's accessible. Those are rare. Or they're not rare, but they're harder to find. And so I would say our network, like through our networks, through word of mouth, that's traditionally how we find them. That being said, data scientists are incredibly mobile. So if you're looking to tap into some of my networks, let's chat, and then I'm sure people would be willing to collaborate digitally and that through those means.
I think we're being called off for the next session, so I don't want to keep us any longer. Thank you so much, and we're here for the rest of the conference if folks have questions for us. Thanks.
Thank you, Natalie, Megan, and Jesse. Thank you in particular, Jesse, for making yourself available at short notice to come to New Brunswick. I hope you enjoyed it as much as we did. That was really wonderful. I'm sure a lot of you will have questions for this powerhouse group of ladies, so please try to find them during the lunch break or the afternoon break to have a chat. We're going to be going very soon into the next plenary session pre-lunch, which starts here in a couple of minutes at 11:30 if people come up on time from downstairs, which will be Kent Aitken on governance in the digital age. So please keep your seats. We'll be starting again in a minute or two.
Yep. Okay.
Okay, folks, you can take your seats. We're going to restart in less than a minute.
Now, welcome back, everybody. Since Govmaker started this morning, my co-chair has undergone a change of title, and I'm delighted to share a very interesting news. Upon the retirement of Gordon Gilman today, Cheryl Hanson is now the Acting Deputy Minister of Treasury Bureau Board of Government of New Brunswick, so I guess we should just give her a round of applause. Okay, so I hope you enjoyed the breakout sessions, and as a reminder, every session in this room is being recorded, and notes have been taken in all rooms for posting on the Govmaker website after the conference. So we're going to move quickly to the plenary session because we want to give our distinguished guest speaker as close as 30 minutes as possible, and also because, as you know, lunch is getting pretty near. So Kent Aitken a intégré la fonction publique fédérale en 2009 pour travailler dans le domaine des politiques publiques, mais il est souvent appelé à examiner les mécanismes d'élaboration des politiques. Au cours des dernières années, il a concentré ses efforts sur la responsabilisation, la transparence et l'engagement des citoyens pour redéfinir les rapports entre les citoyens et leur gouvernement. He now works in outreach and engagement, open government for the Government of Canada. He just finished a year as the Prime Ministers of Canada Fellow at the Public Policy Forum to study and advise on governance in the digital age, the subjects of his talk today. So please welcome to the stage Mr. Kent Aitken.
Good morning. We good on? Okay, there we go. All right, I can see this one. Okay. So, as Cyril mentioned, I currently work for the Government of Canada, but I'm very much so not representing them today. I just came off a year working with the Public Policy Forum, which was basically I had the duty and luxury of doing a year of research, interviewing, depending on how you want to count, somewhere between 150 and 300 different people working in open government and digital transformation in a number of jurisdictions in Canada as well as around the world, with a mandate to basically put a bit of a frame around governance in the digital age. Is it fundamentally different in some way? Are there ways that we're thinking about it that can help us out? And basically deciding what I thought that concept meant in the first place. So where Hillary and the last talk on labs was like painting a very promising, hopeful portrait of the future and some things that governments can do now to improve services. Mine is more so like the big thorny questions about government and governance. I'll get into more of that later. So this is the hope. Within the next decade, the internet will transform not only the way that most public services are delivered, but also the fundamental relationship that exists between government and citizens. This was a federal minister in 2000, and then here would be the flip side that we might hear a bit as well. We've arranged a global civilization which most crucial elements, transportation, communications, and all our industries, including the key democratic institution of voting, profoundly depend on science and technology. We've also arranged things so that almost no one understands science and technology. This is a prescription for disaster. That's Carl Sagan in 1995, famous astrophysicist, and as I dug more into this world, especially the way people are talking about AI and labor market disruption, things like that, I started to think that Carl Sagan may have been somewhat prescient on how he's looking at things. So basically what my year boiled down to is something like this. Taking all of the good intentions, the way we talk about digital transformation, open government, where government is going and where it should, and then putting it through the grinder of government, institutions, laws, policies, structures, conventions, traditions, and seeing what comes out the other side. And so in terms of a bit of a subject matter, I looked at open government, digital government, public sector innovation, but also how governments regulate disruption, how they make sense of emerging technologies and trends, how they support changing economies, and the people that are impacted by them. And this is somewhat, oh, a little bit too far. So this is the orthodoxy for how we talk about this today. Government needs to be more nimble, agile, connected, responsive, user-centric, open, and innovative. And I think generally, you know, with a bit of nuance, most of us here would agree with that. So would I. But we've also been hearing this for 20 years and even longer. There's one of the books I ran across this year was Renewing Governance, Governing by Learning in an Information Age. It was written in 1999. I could take the first couple chapters of that, read them to you verbatim, and you would all think that they apply perfectly today. We have moved in this direction. I don't want to sell short how many government successes there are and how much amazing work is happening. It's a bit of a quirk of government that anything government does well immediately becomes invisible, which makes it hard to tell stories about. When government works, citizens don't care. It just works. But admittedly, as I went through my year, I talked to people that were working on the coal face of digital transformation. I found a lot of other stories, and I started to have a bit of concern that the success stories weren't always the norm for everyone, or that they were a bit fragile. This is a bit of a pet 3 slides of mine, but I think they click well with a group like this. So part of the orthodoxy is phrases like this. The ever-increasing pace of technical change versus the pace of policy making, which is static at best. We have a lot of people that are talking about the pace of change or what is going to happen with technology or what government should do, and I lump them in a category like this, which is not only is it not right, it's not even wrong. Which is a Wolfgang Pauli line. It basically describes concepts that are so vague and fuzzy that you can't prove them right or wrong, so we definitely should be making decisions about them. The pace of change, ergo government should do this, is one of the most common constructions I heard this year. And I think for where government is going, we've almost forgotten that we can have rigor on these things. Like, we know that the government of Canada is engaging more than it ever has. What we don't know is what proportion of policymakers or policy analyst work that's actually changing. Like we're missing some baselines on these things, but because there's uncertainty and because there's fuzziness in this space, it gives people a lot of leeway to make a lot of claims at government to try to get them to over and underreact to things that are changing, to whether they want to regulate economies or changing technologies, anything like that. And I think part of the reason for this is that if you go through the literature on governance, particularly in Canada, particularly on citizen engagement, there's a mass extinction event in about 2009, and it's tied to the defunding of the Canadian policy research networks. There's another smaller one in around 2005 with the Federal Accountability Act, and I don't want to get into whether that is good legislation or bad legislation, but it does seem to have had the practical effect of making it harder for governments to work with social policy NGOs and research organizations. So I have talked to the folks from New Brunswick Social Policy Research Network for years, and I'm so impressed at how they have built and maintained this community in New Brunswick, because those sorts of boundary organizations that put a bit of rigor and emphasis and connect the people doing the research with the people doing the work, I think are so vitally important. And if we want to do a very good job of governance in the digital age, we need to get back to that level of rigor. The other piece of orthodoxy I want to point to, because it's so common, is the world is increasingly complex. We hear that a lot. Business leaders say it's their #1 concern. And I think saying the world is increasingly complex is like saying that planets keep popping into existence and ignoring the advances in telescopes. I think it's that the world was always far more complex than any government could manage from a provincial or federal capital. We're just starting to realize that more and more. We have the data, we have the citizen insights, we have the telecommunications infrastructure. So when we're talking about digital government and open government, I think it's one of the most exciting things is that we get to correct this massive deficiency of the way we've done government since government was a thing. And so trying to wrap a framework on the idea of governance in the digital age. All models are wrong, but some are useful, is the quote. And this is what I've kind of landed on as my model for it to start talking about it. And so I've called it open, contextual, and horizontal. So with contextual, it's a lot of what Hillary was talking about today, although it applies elsewhere. It's basically that what you think will happen doesn't really matter when you're designing for people. It's what they actually do when they get to a service that matters, and often it is not what you think what they will do. We've started to realize that people's individual experiences at service centers and on websites completely changes their view of government, their experience, their frustration. And we have the data to prove that now. The horizontal one is that neither people nor problems care about how a government is organized. And so when you start to say, when you're sitting in a room with stakeholders and you're saying, oh, that's great, I appreciate your concern, but my team doesn't deal with that, and you work for a government, it sounds silly coming out of your mouth, as well it should. The more citizen engagement we do outside government walls, it actually means we have to do a lot more inside to actually make it cohesive and sensible. And then the open side of things, which is both something that is technologically enabled, but it's also more of a cultural side of our word, but it's really ultimately how we build on each other's work. It's how we only make new mistakes, and it's how we put a bit of risk on the status quo. This is just the standard. This is the demand from everyone these days. We're never getting away from this, but the good news is I can also make government better. And so we are in the middle of this. And all of this adds up to essentially a world that is data rich. It means we have the information to do government better, but it also means that our shortcomings are in the spotlight. The bar keeps on getting higher, and it's never going to stop doing that. And then I call those features of the digital age, but they are also very much so, you could call them the goals of things like digital government and open government. That's how we talk about it. But the thing that I'll add to this is that they are also what I think are the challenges of governance in the digital age. Government was typically very closed. It's been getting more and more open over the last 30 years in particular, and especially the last 10. Government is not built to be horizontal. Government is built around minister-by-minister accountability, and that asserts itself in still very powerful ways these days. And government is definitely not built to be contextual. Government is a machine designed for dispassionate aggregation of the public interest and making hard decisions and trade-offs. And now we're asking governments to consider all of the possible variables, consider individual users down to the person, and make decisions that leave no one behind. These things are difficult, and and I think it leads to a lot of the way things are today. So this is one of the questions I landed on for my year, which is, does government need to fundamentally change? And I think this question is interesting precisely because everyone says that it does. If you read op-eds or if you read books about governance, this is something that people trot out very casually, presentations. So the fact that this is what people who are smart observers of the scene are calling on government to do, I think it's an interesting thing to reflect on. And like, we could debate the word fundamentally, but like, show of hands for thinking that this is a reasonable depiction of the level of seriousness we should have about government change? Okay. All right, I like that. That's good. And so, as I said, everything that works well in government becomes invisible, but there are amazing success stories. There's incredible work going on. The federal government puts out Social Security checks with a 99.99% accuracy rate. Some of the projects that Hillary talked about this morning are just streaming along wonderfully. But there's also this side, which is, I heard a lot of stories, and this interviewee summed it up pretty well. Every government we talk to, it's the same. Everything is set up wrong for this. So I'm going to bounce around a little bit between digital government, open government, regulating technological change, because I think it's interesting how the same patterns play out in each context. So if we're talking about digital transformation, talking to a number of jurisdictions around the country, this is the common theme. The teams that are working really well exist on a web of fast tracks, exemptions, workarounds, and air cover, i.e. They have senior executive championship that is actually helping them get their work done. If they're doing HR, they're at the top of the list. These are the sorts of things that work really well if your program benefits from those advantages, and it doesn't work well pretty much anywhere else. Open government, Canada has been a leader in the world with the top of the Open Data Barometer. Canada just signed on to be the co-chair of the Open Government Partnership starting in 2018. And but again, if you go talk to a number of jurisdictions, there's also this story that emerges that someone framed as the open government retrograde, which was a couple years of progress and then either a key elected official or sometimes a senior bureaucrat leaves, and all of a sudden there's either a slowdown or in some cases a straight up backslide. And on the public sector innovation sort of lens, we could go in a number of different directions. This is how I'll frame it for today. Accountability is greater than innovation in some cases. The OECD is currently in Canada doing a review of public sector innovation, and the best success stories that they found, things that are successes by any metric, very cool things that like make the top of their international list for cool things government are doing, they also describe as incredibly fragile. The wrong person leaving could sewer it, the wrong person leaving could set it back by 6 months, and that has been their experience in some cases. And the one thing they said is that because all these things are by their nature horizontal, it basically requires someone to have vision and say, this is the direction we're going to go, we're going to make it happen, and like we're going to just chase the outcomes. And in many cases, some of those programs, even where successful, are just being shoved back in a bit of a box because the accountability structures of government are asserting themselves over time. He said he was struck by just how powerful the culture of accountability is in Canada as compared to other countries they work with. So, now I'm going to get into a bit of like the pace of technological change and how governments deal with that. And I'm telling these stories for two reasons, but I'll get to that in a second. This is years to adoption by 25% of the US population for a number of major technologies over the course of the 1900s. Electricity, telephone, radio, television, PC, mobile phone, the web. 46 years to adoption by 25% for electricity, 7 for the web. The trend here is pretty bleak, pretty obvious, unless you want to call it years to adoption by 50% of the US population and use slightly different starting definitions for the term first commercially available, which is these gray bars. And all of a sudden the story becomes a bit muddier. And the reason I tell this story is because government is constantly called on to both over and underreact to what's going on in the water ecosystem. Optimists get to lead the discourse on changing technology, on where things are going, because they're the ones that believe there's a value in it and often a business incentive. It takes a few years for governments and academics to catch up once something becomes a critical mass and a phenomenon to study or an impact on society rather than an opportunity to chase. But these are the sorts of things that you find throughout our discourse on governance, and it's up to government to be able to make sense of these reliably and either intervene or not at the right time with the right magnitude. The second reason I mention it is because we always talk about the pace of change as one of the reasons government has to do something different today, which I think undersells the problem significantly. And I'll point to this concept which we call problem DNA. So speed is a bit of it, absolutely. What's probably a lot more powerful is the concept of agency. It's not just government does something because of the pace of change. It's what do the actual individuals in government who are responsible and are experts in this, how do they make decisions in context when something like this comes up? The second question is, do they have a mandate to do this, which is still a surprisingly powerful thing in governments in Canada. And I'll tell you 2 stories of technological change, and we can examine the government response. One is Uber. The pattern that happened consistently throughout North America is Uber moved in every single big city, going basically down the list by population. And in a lot of cases, there were protests from taxi drivers, threats, lobbies to elected officials, and in some cases, actual violence. And we saw this coming for about a year. The pattern repeated itself constantly. And when they were about to come to Ottawa, one would think we would have all the information required to take a proactive stance, to change the bylaws, to put out statements to say this is how this is going to happen. And that is absolutely not what happened. We had protests, we had violence, and we had a lot of uncertainty about how the world was going to roll out. It would be tempting to say that, of course, the proactive stance would have been better. And in many cases it will be. But one can also understand from the point of view of the individual officials, they didn't know the counterfactual. They could not say with certainty that it was going to play out the way that it did. In hindsight, it looks very clear, but when you're looking at it, you're like, oh, well, why would we go through this massive effort for something that may not happen or may not happen in a really terrible way? And the other thing is purely from an incentives point of view, and to be blunt, there is more reward for solving a crisis that everyone knows about than heading off a problem before anyone knows it exists, both the people in an organization around you, let alone the public. So when we're talking about the pace of technological change, these are fundamentally governance and accountability issues. They are political issues. It is not a technology issue. The story of technology and change in government is a story of accountability and governance. The second story I'll tell is the collapse of the Grand Banks fishery in 1992 that put 40,000 people out of work. Again, this was driven by technology, bigger boats, better equipment, and the advent of sonar. And the research indicated in every direction that this was going to happen probably 10 years out. I'm sure academics could debate me on that point, but I think the story stands. And so this picture, if you've ever seen the Heritage Minutes commercial, really? Oh, heavens. I thought I had this down. I'm at 5 minutes, and I'm behind. But the problem isn't the pace of change on this or the fact that government couldn't see it coming. It's that it was fundamentally a very human and personal issue. This was asking people to leave their homes, to leave aging parents behind, to move and deal with retraining and years of economic uncertainty. So one can imagine that it's very tempting, even if you have really solid evidence saying that something is going to happen, and to have acted would have created more benefit for more people in the long run, to have still kind of held out on the hope that the problem could be managed and we wouldn't have to be as dire as we thought. So now I have to decide on the fly what I want to skip. As Hillary said earlier, governments are digital. This is the service touch points for the Government of Canada. 8 million in person, 74 million on the phone, and 290 million via the web. And I would say that in those 290 million, there are still a lot of lost opportunities. There are services that are not optimized. There's a lot of frustration, and there's a lot of stories like this. But I'm going to skip that. I'll try to blow through this very quickly. It needs to be milliseconds. One of the most common things I heard this year is that government needs to be like Amazon. And this story is when Amazon launched their mobile app, the load times were heavy. Someone complained to Jeff Bezos, the CEO, and he wrote to his CTO and said, what can we do about this? And his CTO wrote back and said, nah, I think we can get it down to 2 seconds. And Jeff Bezos immediately wrote back and said it needs to be milliseconds. He's contradicting the person who is supposed to be the technology leader for his organization, and it's because he knew the data that even a small difference in load times, even 2 seconds seeming very short, is enough to turn off a lot of people, and especially over the volume of transactions they were doing, that adds up to a lot of lost sales. And this was relayed to me as a story about the importance of line of sight to how services are being delivered and how executives need to know how services are experienced by citizens. But the flip side of that is that even the top 14 departments in the Government of Canada, they get calls on about 3,500 different programs and services in the run of a year on thousands of mission-critical IT systems. We're great at top tasks in service optimization. What happens below the surface in that gigantic bottom of the iceberg that doesn't get attention, that's what I'm worried about, and that's where I do think we need different governance. And what it looks like, there's really no satisfying answer to it. So we hear things like this: governance needs to be more user-centric, governance needs to engage more. This is where I think we're lacking. And Lauren, I promise I'll be really quick. So if government needs to be this, and that's the direction that we've set, these are the questions I think we have to work through is, like, how many teams in government are actually doing that work? Do they agree with you? Do they even know that's the direction? If they want to do that, do they have the resources, capacity, and support to do it? What happens if they don't do it? Basically, by definition, executives see the services that benefit from their oversight. The ones that don't are invisible to them, and because of that nature of the horizontal, contextual, open thing where we're realizing that that iceberg is bigger than we ever thought, there's more under the surface than we ever thought. That isn't getting attention. Explain. This is the most cliche slide in every presentation ever, but I think it's important here, but I already talked about it. So what's the solution to this? The problem is, for complex problems, there is no solution. There are choices. This nice straight line to problem to solution doesn't exist. There's an environment, and there are the impacts that we have on it. Not everything on the environment side is negative. Not everything on the solution side is positive. It looks different to everyone, and all of these Venn diagram bubbles are always changing shape and size and moving around. However, there's no map, there's no playbook, there's no solution, but we do have systems that get us to solutions pretty reliably. And the question is the logic model, like I described through that list of questions, of how that actually gets throughout government. As Hillary said, how it goes from 60 people to 60,000, and you infect the government with that system. UX testing, UX research, user testing, citizen engagement to bring insight into government, people that do foresight, people that work in labs. These are the sorts of skills that help groups of people get to the insight and get to the right answer in contexts that they don't understand when they start. And the problem is that very few teams need that expertise 7 days a week, 52 weeks a year. And that is where we have fallen down, and that's where the recommendations from the 20 years ago that we haven't implemented yet, that's where we're lacking. And then there's 3 other things that are super important, and I can't talk about them. The one quick thing is that a lot of people say that government needs to be more conveners and facilitators rather than subject matter experts. I actually disagree completely, and I think that government needs to be as good, if not better, than the people telling them to over and underreact. We need to be more trained, more state-of-the-art than we've ever been to make sense, to fact-check, to contextualize all of the insight that's pouring in. I will wrap it up there on this. Civilization advances by extending the number of important operations which we can perform without thinking about them. I think that is also true for government. Right now, we are thinking about too much. We need to devolve it into systems, processes, and structures far more than we do. And that's how I think we get to peace, order, and really, really good government. Thank you. I didn't get to tell my favorite story later.
Thank you, Kent.
Thank you.
I think it was a really good overview of some of the complexities that certainly exist in government as we move forward. So I want to thank you very much for that. And Kent is not feeling well, so I want to give you kudos just for, doing what you did this morning. I really appreciate it. So thank you very much. Can we have a picture? Oh, a picture. Good. Thank you. Is this yours?
Yes.
All right, lunch. So lunch is just outside in the atrium. This way, right, Lorna? And to maximize our time, we're doing self-service. So you'll find fancy brown bag lunches, and there's signs identifying what kind of sandwich or wraps are inside. Each bag contains a whole lunch, so grab a bag and drinks and get moving. Speed matters because we have a great session over the lunch break happening here. And if you love labs, I encourage you to come back quickly because Amanda Hashi is going to be speaking to us about news from the new lab. After Amanda, we're going to roll right into a 1 p.m. to 3 p.m. with 3 concurrent sessions, followed by a break, and then our third and final keynote at 3:30. So it's a busy afternoon. So I encourage you to be back here at 1 for a lively panel, followed by the ever-popular lightning talks. All right? Your other choices at 1, just so people know, are downstairs in the Marysville room, Jamie Gamble's workshop on wicked evaluation, and in the Nashwauk Assist room, Susan Johnson and Rebecca Marland offer a workshop Does Engagement Enhance Trust, building on their work here from last year. So it's going to be hard to choose. Please consult your program and go grab a lunch, and we'll see you back here at 12:15.